this paper that we called Queer Urban Trauma and the Politics of Urban Movements in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem is basically part of co-authored papers that I'm writing nowadays together with Dr. Gili Artal, and it's also part of a larger project, also a shared project, where we aim to rethink about the specialities of queer urban movements, not only in comparison between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, but within the context of the Middle East and beyond. So, but this is only a small part of the larger project. So I would like to start my presentation with three photos. The first one was taken, as you can see, the 1st of August 2009. It is a candle lighting outside the Tel Aviv Gay Center in Gan Meir in the city center. And the photo was taken few hours after the shooting in the Bar Noar, in the youth club in Tel Aviv, and the killing of two young community members. So this is the first photo. I will, of course, I will come back to discuss the photo later. The second photos, where you can see on the left side, you can see handmade signs made presented by a spontaneous gathering of people outside the Tel Aviv Gay Center. Actually, it's the same place where I took the other photo, the first one. It was taken the 30th of July 2015, just a few hours after the incident in Jerusalem, where Shira Banki was stabbed to death. And it was just a few hours after it happened in Jerusalem. On the right side, you can see a photo that was took few weeks later. This event in Jerusalem, in Zion Square in Jerusalem, where a lot of people, not only or mainly not from the queer or LGBT community, gathered in the square. It was an organized event where people come to discuss the events. And the last photo, this one, this is a photo that I took at the 12th of June 2016, also in Gan Meir, not far from the gay center in Meir Park in Tel Aviv. And it's what you can see is a spontaneous gathering of mainly young queers, but not only, with candles and signs. And it was this gathering, it was in the middle of the night. It was as a reaction to the murder in a Paul's Club in Orlando, if you remember this event. So following those special traumatic moments that you could see on the photos, both in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, we would like to focus in this paper on the role of what we called queer urban trauma and its geographies and its role in shaping the special politics of activism of queer urban movements. In the largest project that I mentioned earlier, we compared the LGBT and queer urban movements in Israel's two largest cities, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And in particular, we focused on Tel Aviv's Municipal Gay Center and the Jerusalem Open House as two very important sites or hubs of activism, both of them serving as a community activism hubs. And we claim that while both movements, the one in Jerusalem and the one in Tel Aviv, operate within the same Israeli structure of opportunities, there are major differences between them, leading to distinct politics and in turn, to different forms of special visibility, presence, and activity of LGBT and queer urban movements. So the importance of discussing Israel urban queer movements lies on the fact that most of the existing writing on queer geographies and queer political and activism geographies is theoretically and empirically grounded in English-speaking countries. The Israeli experience differs in some important aspects from the Western experience, as well as that of non-Anglo-American countries. So Israel is kind of a very unique example. Also, the two traumatic events we faced in Israel, the first one in Tel Aviv in August 2009 with the shooting to death of two young queers in the youth club, the Bar Noach Club, and later the stabbing to death of 16-year-old Shira Banki during the 2015 Jerusalem Gay Pride Parade. Both two events, or two traumatic events, shaped the local queer politics in both two cities, the state-community relationships, and made us think critically on the role of traumatic events on spatial politics and queer social movements. So during the last 2 decades, growing geographical attention has been devoted to the speciality and political geography of urban social movements, and recently some scholars put the attention to queer urban movements, their politics and their specialities, while sociologists like Diane Richardson, which is here, coined and developed some important concepts such as sexual citizenship that helps us to study and understand queer political movements and politics within cities. Some scholars, mainly geographers, mainly British geographers, like Gavin Brown and Cass Brown and others, also shed some lights on future possibilities of such a queer movement in an era of austerity and neoliberalism. Trauma was almost neglected from these studies and from queer geographies in general. This is not a big surprise, since traumatic events and their speciality are rarely discussed within political or socio-cultural geographies, and not only from queer geography. And here I have to mention something that in cultural geography there is some aspects of and writing about trauma and memories, but not in relation to to collectives, mainly in relation to individuals. And if it is, if it has to do with collectives, it has to do with wars, genocide, like very, very big events, not the kind of traumatic events that we are looking for. So in Israel geography, we found something like cultural geographers Moses Riau studied the ways in which the traumatic event of the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in the mid-90s affected the urban space of Rabin Square in Tel Aviv, and the use of the square by the citizens, the traumatic citizens. And some British geographers such as Rachel Payne and Jill Valentine studied the speciality of fear and trauma from critical and feminist perspectives. So there are some scholarly writings, but not about urban traumas and sexuality. We couldn't find anything or almost anything. Trauma and traumatic events are mainly discussed within psychoanalysis, psychology, literature, history, and mainly as part of a therapeutic discussion like social work, psychology, and they mainly discuss it as a personal phenomena and not as a collective one. The American Psychiatric Association defines trauma as, and I cite, the single, terrifying blow that assaults the body that arises from violence, disaster, or accidents. This is a definition from 1994. Since our aim here is not to understand the personal or collective psychological aspect of trauma, but to understand the geographies and special politics of traumatic events in urban areas, and in particular the ways in which they affect urban social movements and activism, we follow Jeffrey Alexander, which argues that traumas are not merely psychological, but also collective and social experience and phenomena. And also we follow Laura Brown, who argued that in the lives of queer people, there are repeated experiences of trauma and loss, and these are important in order to understand queer communities. We also use queer theory scholarship, mainly the work of Hans Vetkovich and Douglas Cream. They both worked on the traumatic experience of people who were active in ACT UP. I don't have enough time to get deeply into it, but we use their work as well. So we compared Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And as I already mentioned, we mainly compared the open house in Jerusalem and the gay center in Tel Aviv as big hubs of social movements and activism. And both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem have shared legacy of violence toward LGBT individuals during the last decade, unfortunately. The murder in the youth club in Tel Aviv and the stabbing to death of Shira Banki and the wounded of 5 other marchers as the parade passed through central Jerusalem changed the relationship between state authorities, local municipalities, and community activism and queer movements in the two cities, but in different ways. And this is our main argument. Even though LGBT phobia and violence are in relation to nationalist, masculinist, and militaristic Israeli society, the causes of these atrocities, as well as their aftermath, reveal something about the difference between the two urban movements. The hate crime in Tel Aviv did not take place during a pride parade, and the impact of the Barnor shooting led to a spontaneous public rally just the day after. Okay. Just the day after the event, mainly local activists and shocked community members took part in this rally. But soon after the Barnor shooting incident, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the first time ever the gay center to offer his condolences. A week after the shooting, a mass rally took place in Rabin Square, the main square of Tel Aviv, considered as the national square and in which many political rallies took place. I will skip into some photos. The president and several government members from the ruling nationalist Likud party spoke at this rally in Tel Aviv, demonstrating what Eyal Gross described as the deal between the right-wing government and the homonormative parts of the LGBT community to promote Israeli homonationalism. We didn't see such a hug for the community from the state authorities or the local municipality in Jerusalem. Also, a year after the murder in Jerusalem, Jerusalem faced the biggest pride parade ever. It's on the left side in 2016, with more than 25,000 participants. Many of them were supporters from other Jerusalem communities, not from the LGBT community, including Jewish religious people. Moreover, some of the main reactions organized by queer activists after the stabbing took place in Tel Aviv, mainly around the Tel Aviv Gay Center and not in Jerusalem, not in the city where the traumatic event happened. And can I take one more minute? Okay, thank you. So some preliminary conclusions. As already mentioned, it's a study in progress. So queer trauma has a geography. And the geography is not only personal, it's not only memories, it's not a geography of memory, but also collective and also political. It's a political geography. And queer trauma has to do with loss and mourning, and in particular with the loss of safe space, as claimed by Hans Vetkovich. But we suggest that since reclaiming this space back to the community is a political and thus a geographical and spatial demand, it needs political action to fulfill it. In liberal Tel Aviv, reclaiming back the space, the safe space, is a spontaneous and immediate political demand, unlike in the holy and not so gay-friendly space of Jerusalem. Another point, the socio-political geography of traumatic event doesn't have to be based in the place or the city where the event itself happened. We saw it in Jerusalem, where the immediate gathering took place in Tel Aviv, not in Jerusalem. And in both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, we saw a very big public political events happened after the trauma. But in Jerusalem, it took a few weeks, and the biggest event, it took it 1 year. Just the year after, we could see a very big event. In Tel Aviv, it took less than a week. The Saturday night just after the murder, there was a huge event, even larger than the Gay Pride Parade in 2016 in Jerusalem. So we saw a lot of differences between the two cities. It's not only space, it's time and space. And in both cases, we saw two kinds of special and political reaction to the queer trauma. The first one is an immediate one, which was more radical intra-community and derived by emotions of emergency and rage. And only after it came the very public, more inclusive, mainstream and non-radical reaction. So in Tel Aviv, it took a week to move between these two stages. In Jerusalem, it took a year. And of course, it has to do with the differences in, of course, culture, politics, society between the two cities. And I think I will stop here because I took more time than I allow. Okay, so thank you very much.